Everyone believed Daniel Kalu was dead. The police believed it. The town believed it. Even the man who shared his blood eventually learned how to live like it was true. Daniel vanished 12 years ago on a rainy night that swallowed sound and memory. One moment he was a brother laughing in the kitchen. The next he was a name spoken in past tense. No body was found. No final call was made. Just a trail that ended in mud, rumors, and silence. What nobody prepared Matthew Kalu for was the sound. A knock. Not loud, not desperate. Just 3 slow taps on his front door at exactly 11:47 at night. If you are listening to this story, make sure you stay until the end and share it with someone you trust. Stories like this remind us that the past never stays buried, and ignoring truth always comes with a price. Matthew stood frozen in his living room, remote dangling from his fingers as the television continued to talk to an empty space. The knock came again. 3 taps. Calm, certain, like whoever stood outside already knew Matthew would open the door. He did not want to move. His chest tightened in a way he had not felt since the night the police stopped asking questions. Since the night his mother screamed into a pillow so the neighbors would not hear. Since the night Matthew learned what guilt sounded like when it breathed. He told himself it was nothing. A neighbor, a mistake, a drunk stranger. But deep inside, something older than logic had already recognized the rhythm. Matthew walked slowly, every step heavy, every breath measured. His hands shook as he reached the handle. The porch light outside flickered once, twice, then stayed on. When the door opened, the past stepped forward. Daniel stood there, taller than Matthew remembered, thinner, sharper. His hair was longer, pulled back carelessly, his face marked with scars that told stories Matthew did not want to hear. His eyes were the worst part. They were no longer warm or reckless or alive in the way brothers recognize instantly. They were cold, measured, and full of something that had learned how to wait. Matthew tried to speak. No sound came out. Daniel smiled, but it was not a smile meant to comfort. It was the kind meant to remind. "You look surprised," Daniel said. His voice was deeper, rougher, like it had been scraped raw by years of silence. "Did you think I was dead forever?" Matthew staggered back. His legs gave way and he had to grab the door frame to stay upright. "You are dead," Matthew whispered. "They said you were dead." Daniel stepped inside without asking. The door closed behind him with a quiet final click that echoed louder than any scream. "They said a lot of things," Daniel replied. "You believed them." Matthew's living room suddenly felt too small. The walls pressed in as memories he had buried clawed their way back to the surface. Daniel took his time looking around, touching the furniture, the photographs, the framed certificates. "You did well for yourself," Daniel said. "Nice house, quiet street, good job. Looks like the world moved on." Matthew swallowed. "Where have you been?" Daniel turned slowly. "You know where I have been." "No," Matthew said quickly. "I do not. I searched. I waited. I talked to the police. I did everything." Daniel laughed softly. "Everything except tell the truth." The words landed like a slap. Matthew felt his throat tighten. "I do not know what you mean." Daniel walked closer. Every step felt deliberate, rehearsed. He stopped inches from Matthew's face. "You left me," Daniel said. "You watched me disappear and you let them close the case." "That is not true," Matthew said, his voice breaking. "I thought you were gone. I thought you were dead." Daniel leaned in, his breath warm, his eyes sharp. "You thought wrong." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the window like a reminder that the world still existed beyond this moment. Daniel stepped back and sat down on the couch like he had every right to be there, like this was still his home. 12 years, Daniel said. 12 years of waking up hungry. 12 years of sleeping with one eye open. 12 years of remembering the look on your face when you decided I was not worth saving. Matthew sank into a chair across from him. His hands trembled. "Tell me," Matthew said quietly. "Tell me what happened." Daniel's smile faded. His eyes darkened. "Do you really want to know?" he asked. "Or do you want the version that lets you sleep at night?" Matthew closed his eyes. He saw flashes of the past. The night everything broke. The argument. The fear. The choice. "Tell me everything," Matthew said. Daniel nodded. "Good, because I came back to make sure you remember." The night Daniel disappeared started like any other. The brothers had argued before. They always did. Daniel was reckless, angry at the world, unwilling to accept the quiet life Matthew wanted. Matthew was careful, cautious, always afraid of losing what little stability they had left after their father died. That night, Daniel had come home furious. "They are going to ruin us," Daniel shouted, pacing the kitchen. "They want me to take the fall." Matthew knew who he meant, the men they worked for, the men who smiled in public and destroyed lives in private. "Lower your voice," Matthew warned. "Someone might hear." "Let them hear," Daniel snapped. "I am done being their scapegoat." Matthew grabbed his arm. "You cannot just walk away. You know what they do to people who talk." Daniel pulled free. "Then help me." Matthew hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a second. It lasted 12 years. Daniel stormed out into the rain. Matthew watched from the doorway, heart pounding, telling himself Daniel would cool off and come back, telling himself this was not the night everything would end. Hours later, the police came. They asked questions Matthew did not know how to answer. They looked at him like they already suspected something. When the men they worked for arrived with lawyers and smiles, Matthew said nothing. He told himself he was protecting himself, protecting his mother, protecting what little life they had. Daniel vanished into the dark, and Matthew let him. Back in the present, Daniel finished speaking. "That is the last night you remember," Daniel said, "but it was just the beginning for me." Matthew's eyes were wet. "I was afraid." Daniel nodded. "So was I." Matthew looked up. "Why now?" Daniel stood. His shadow stretched long across the wall. "Because the people who erased me are still breathing," Daniel said, "and because you helped them do it." Matthew shook his head. "I did not help them. I was trapped." Daniel moved toward the door. "You have 1 week," Daniel said. 1 week to decide who you really are." The door opened. "If you warn them," Daniel added without turning around, "you will wish you had stayed silent forever." The door closed. Matthew was alone again, but the dead had returned, and they were angry. Matthew did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed until dawn, replaying Daniel's words again and again. Every sentence carried weight. Every pause felt intentional. This was not a reunion. This was a reckoning that had been delayed, not avoided. By morning, Matthew understood something he had refused to face for 12 years. Daniel had not come back to be forgiven. He had come back to settle accounts. The week that followed felt unreal. Matthew went to work, smiled at coworkers, answered emails, and laughed at jokes that barely reached his ears. Inside, his chest stayed tight. Every unfamiliar sound made him flinch. Every passing shadow looked like his brother waiting patiently. On the third day, Matthew noticed the first sign that Daniel was already moving. One of the men from their past was arrested, not quietly. Police cars flooded the street, news cameras arrived, charges were announced: fraud, trafficking, money laundering. Names that had once been untouchable were suddenly being spoken aloud. Matthew watched the broadcast from his office computer, his hands cold. Daniel had started. That evening, Matthew returned home to find his door unlocked. His heart pounded as he stepped inside. The lights were off. The house smelled faintly of something familiar. Old cologne. Daniel's. Matthew followed the sound of quiet breathing into the kitchen. Daniel sat at the table, calm, composed, holding a cup of tea like this was still his home. "You should lock your door," Daniel said without looking up. "People forget how easy it is to lose things." Matthew closed the door slowly. "What are you doing?" "Finishing what was started," Daniel replied. "You see the news?" "Yes," Matthew said. "That was you." Daniel smiled. That was the truth finally catching up. Matthew pulled out a chair and sat. "You are going to get yourself killed." Daniel met his gaze. "I already died once." Silence stretched between them. "Why come to me?" Matthew asked. "If you hate me so much, why involve me at all?" Daniel leaned forward. "Because you are the last one pretending none of this happened." Matthew swallowed. "What do you want from me?" Daniel's voice dropped. "I want you to choose." Matthew frowned. "Choose what?" Daniel stood and walked to the window. "The men who ruined us are panicking. They will look for leverage. They will look for you." Matthew's stomach turned. "Why me?" Daniel turned back. "Because you were the one who stayed clean, the one who looked innocent, the one they think they still own." Matthew shook his head. "I cannot do what you are thinking." "You already did," Daniel said. "You just did it quietly." The next days unfolded faster. Another arrest, another exposure, another name erased. Each time, Matthew felt the walls closing in. He received calls from unfamiliar numbers, old associates asking questions disguised as concern. On the sixth day, Matthew was invited to a private meeting. The location was familiar, too familiar. The warehouse near the river, the same place Daniel disappeared. Matthew arrived early. The building smelled of rust and old water. The floor echoed under his steps. When the men arrived, they looked smaller than Matthew remembered, older, desperate. "We need your help," one of them said. "Your brother is causing problems." Matthew felt a bitter irony twist inside him. "My brother is dead." The man leaned closer. "We can make sure you stay safe. Just tell us where he is." Matthew saw it clearly then. The fear, the weakness, the lie that power lasted forever. "I do not know," Matthew said. They studied his face, searching. "You always were loyal," the man said. "Do not change now." Matthew left without looking back. That night Daniel returned. Matthew was waiting. "They tried to use me," Matthew said. Daniel nodded. "I expected that." "I did not tell them anything," Matthew added. Daniel studied him. For the first time, something softened in his expression. "Good," Daniel said. Matthew stood. "This ends now." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You do not get to decide that." "I do," Matthew said, "because I am done being afraid." The brothers stared at each other. The past stood between them like a wall built from choices neither could undo. "Come with me," Daniel said suddenly. "Tonight." "Where?" Matthew asked. "To the place you left me," Daniel replied. They drove in silence. The warehouse stood abandoned, lit only by the moon and the distant hum of the city. Daniel led the way inside. He stopped at a rusted door and pushed it open. The room was small, concrete walls, no windows. "This is where they kept me," Daniel said. "Weeks at first, then months." Matthew's chest tightened. "They thought I would break," Daniel continued. "They were wrong." Daniel turned to him. "This is where I decided I would never be invisible again." Footsteps echoed. The men arrived just as Daniel planned. Voices raised, weapons drawn. The truth spilled faster than blood. Hidden recordings played through speakers Daniel had set up. Confessions, names, dates, everything. Police sirens followed. Chaos erupted. In the end, there was no dramatic shootout, no final blow. Just men realizing they had already lost. As the police took them away, Daniel stood still, watching. "It is over," Matthew said quietly. Daniel did not answer. Days passed. Daniel disappeared again. This time there were no knocks, no warnings. Matthew waited. Then he stopped. Months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. You did not fail me twice. Matthew folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. He would never know where Daniel went, or who he became after revenge lost its shape. But he knew one thing. The dead had come back to remind the living that silence is also a choice, and choices always return. If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own past, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow for more powerful stories that remind us why truth matters and why unfinished business never stays buried.